a short talk from Parvati, who also gave a talk last night that was really amazing and interesting and cool. And I'm really happy to have her on the schedule. She is a yoga teacher, and she's a 3-time contestant and winner of Survivor Micronesia. And she has lots of other interesting things about her that I'll let her talk about herself maybe. And so without further ado, Parvati Shalom.
Yes, as Jeff mentioned, I did compete on Survivor. I did win once. And just before we get into this talk that's going to have nothing to do with Survivor, I'll just alleviate the questions on everyone's minds. Yes, I ate bugs. And no, I did not hook up with anyone on the island, so thanks, Mom. Made her really proud. This talk is about addiction. So raise your hands if you personally struggle with addiction, you have a family member or a friend who has struggled with addiction, you've witnessed someone struggle with substance abuse and addiction. Pretty much nearly everyone in this room. And that is how addiction came to me. I didn't struggle with the problem myself. I witnessed the devastation of a family member who got sucked into using drugs and alcohol at the early age of 13. And the spiral from there was rapid, and it was absolutely devastating for me, for my family member, and for my entire family. So they call addiction a family dis-ease, because it not only affects the person who's struggling with the addiction, but it also impacts the entire friendship unit, the family unit that surrounds that person. 23 million people are struggling right now with a substance abuse problem. And of those people, only 10% are actually getting treatment. So there's this massive gap between people that are getting the treatment that they need for addiction and the people that are struggling with addiction. We really don't know how to deal with it. And my witnessing my family member dive into this really dark place of addiction, I didn't know what to do because I'd never encountered it myself. I didn't have a problem with substance abuse, and so I didn't get it. And it was really hard for me to not understand and to see him having such a hard time not being able to control himself. And so I struggled with all of these questions, like, why is this happening to him and not me? We have the same genetics. We're from the same family. Why could I experiment with drugs and alcohol in college and beyond, and still I'm not addicted? I don't have this problem. Why him and not me? So I started to dig into those questions. I became the health editor at cbsnews.com, and as my first project there, I created a campaign called the 14 Days on the Wagon campaign. And within this campaign, I challenged people to stop using alcohol for 14 days. I challenged myself also to stop using alcohol for 14 days and to have an experience of what life is like without drinking for 2 weeks. At the same time, I was interviewing doctors. I was interviewing people on the cutting edge of addiction treatment and recovery. I was interviewing people in long-term recovery. Those are people who have actively abstained from using drugs and alcohol for 5, 10, 15, even 20 years of their life. They are in recovery, and it's possible, and it was really beautiful and hopeful to meet those people and to hear their stories. So what I learned on this journey of exploring these questions, why him, why not me, why does addiction affect certain people and not other people, I met a man named Dr. Gabor Mate. He's a genius. He's from Vancouver. Do you know him? I love this man. He's an absolute genius. And Gabor Mate, he runs a safe injection site in Canada and has dealt with the political fallout and the popularity fallout from running a place like that. And he's worked with the lowest of the low, like homeless drug addicts, people who are sex workers, trafficking themselves, and also just using every different type of drug, who've been in and out of treatment, who haven't been able to sustain a life of recovery. He's working with people that most people would think were absolutely hopeless. And what struck me when I spoke to this man was he still held on, despite the people that he was working with, despite having lost so many patients and so many clients and witnessing the worst that drugs and substances can do to a person's body and a person's spirit, he still had hope. And what he teaches about addiction is something that I'd like to share with you, and hopefully something that we can start to spread the message of throughout this world, is that all addiction is an escape from pain. So I call addiction a dis-ease because it's not necessarily a disease, but it's a dis-ease within the body. And what Gabor teaches is that children who have been traumatized at a young age, their brains will change. So their brains change in such a way that they become more susceptible to addiction later on in their lives. So an early childhood trauma could look like anything. We're all different, right? So it could be as heavy as being sexually abused or physically abused or verbally abused, and it could be as little as like not having someone give you a seat next to them in the lunchroom and feeling left out. And no one knows what those moments will be, but they affect us differently. And sometimes a traumatic experience like that will really ingrain itself in a person's body, and then it will become this experience that actually changes the physical structure of the brain, which leads to addiction later on, right? So Gabor says that what we're doing in this world is we're taking drug addicts and we're putting them in jail because they're selling drugs, they're committing crimes to get their drugs. We're locking them up. They're a menace to society, right? There's all of this stigma around being an addict. There's all of this shame that people take on for having addiction. And now we're putting them in jail. Which just serves to re-traumatize the individual. So they're in jail, they're surrounded by other people who have committed violent crimes, who have done terrible things, and things like really obscene things that people need to be imprisoned for just to make sure that society is safe. And some of these people are non-violent drug offenders, and they're surrounded by these other people. So now they have this experience in jail, they're re-traumatized in jail, they're treated like prisoners, they're treated like scum of the earth, and then we release them out into the world and they're still addicted, and they come back out, they've had no rehabilitation, so what are they gonna do? Of course, they're gonna go use the drug that helps them to ease the pain that they're feeling in their bodies. So it's just this vicious cycle, and if these people have no family members or friends that can help to support them and help them get into treatment, then they're gonna continue this cycle forever of addiction, unless some moment of grace comes, right? And even as a family member, the hardest thing to witness, and maybe some of you have had this experience as well, if you know someone who's struggling with addiction, the hardest thing to witness is people with addiction not wanting help. So as a family member, I did everything I could possibly do. We had an intervention for my family member, and he doesn't want help. And you watch this person kill themselves over and over and over again and just wreck their bodies with these drugs because they're in so much pain. So that's what it is. And if we can start looking at addiction as this person was traumatized, they're trying to escape the pain that they're feeling within their bodies, we who don't struggle with addiction can start to look at these people with more compassion. We can start to see them as human beings instead of that person just can't control themselves. Like, they just need to get a grip. Like, stop using drugs, get over it, and, man up. But if they can't do that and we're judging them, it makes it worse because then we're perpetuating the isolation and the stigma and the shame that they're already feeling. So what helps to heal this, and what I found from my research and the people that I spoke with in long-term recovery, is connection. Connection is the bridge to healing addiction. So when we look at it as trauma is causing the changes in the brain. And then we have the actual taking of the substances. And this could be anything. Addiction could also, it doesn't necessarily have to be drugs. It could also be sex addiction, shopping, whatever we do to try to alleviate a not good feeling within ourselves. So any of those types of escapist tendencies that give us short-term relief but long-term harm, cause long-term harm, is classified as addiction in Gabor's definition. So if we have that, we have the trauma, we have the escape from pain by using the substances or shopping or whatever. We have the isolation, the stigma of what it feels like to not be able to control our own behavior. And now we're just pulling back and isolating ourselves more and more. What can heal that? How is there a way out of that? And the people that I spoke with in long-term recovery, including Tommy Rosen, who started Recovery 2.0, it's a movement to help people live healthy and active and thriving lives in recovery, was the answer is connection. So that's connection to yourself by coming back into the body, using yoga, using meditation, using any sort of physical practice that can help bring you back into this body. So at the moment that you're feeling that awful, I want to escape, I'm feeling pain, I'm feeling insecure, I walk into a room, I don't know anyone, I'm terrified. This is bringing back this flood of traumatic memories from my past. If you can take moments, and we can teach people that struggle with addiction to take these moments to do deep breathing, to get back inside their body and allow that feeling to pass, to acknowledge the sensation, to allow it to pass, then you're reconnected with your body and it's moved through you and the impulse to use is lessened. So we have that connection to ourselves, to our own bodies. And then we have connection to community, to others. So getting involved, becoming active in a community that gives you a sense of purpose, that gives you a sense of what you're doing really matters, is another way through addiction, and it's another way to help stay in recovery. So we have these two ways to connect, and then the last one is purpose. So if you can help people find purpose, if people can find meaning for their lives, then there's a reason for them to be here, and there's a reason for them to say no to using the drugs that they know are going to draw them back into this place of insanity and complete chaos. What's happening in Portugal, I think, really reiterates this. In Portugal, they're doing this study with addiction because they had such high rates of addiction in Portugal that they stopped imprisoning drug offenders. They stopped imprisoning nonviolent drug offenders. They released them from jail. And they started to give stipends to small business owners to hire people who had been arrested for addiction. Or not for addiction, but for drugs, and who had a history of addiction. And what's happened is the rates over time, over the past few years, the rates of addiction in Portugal, since they implemented this program of giving people who formerly struggled with addiction a chance at a new life and a job and a chance to connect with community, the rates have dropped 50% in Portugal, which is pretty massive, right? It's kind of huge, and I like to believe that America is on the same course. Like we're moving in this direction of changing the style, changing our way that we look at people with addiction, and the voices are being heard. There's this huge movement with Alcoholics Anonymous, the Anonymous People, the movie a documentary that came out where people who had previously been anonymous are stepping forward and saying, yes, I struggle with addiction, this is my story, and they're sharing that with others. So we have this momentum growing, and if we can just be these voices of compassion, these voices of connection, these people who don't judge other people for the struggle that they're going through or their past, we can also be leaders in the movement toward healing addiction and empowering our world. So thanks. Go for it.